All right, welcome everybody. My name is Kelly Harris. I am VP of Corporate Culture here at my home group. I know a lot of you guys are not with this brokerage, and that's great. We open our doors and our Zooms to every brokerage because we genuinely want to help all the agents here in Arizona just get better and sharper with their skills. So enough for me. I'm going to hand it over to three professionals that are going to teach you all the benefits of holding your license in a PLLC. And we always start with our wonderful CPA. So Don, I'll throw it to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's great to be here. I appreciate everybody taking some time to get some education on things. I think that's the sign of a good business person you never know enough, and there's always new things out there. So I applaud you on that. It means you care. So my role in this is to talk a little bit about the tax benefits of becoming a PLLC and then potentially deciding to be taxed as an S corporation. So as a starting point, and I'll pull up I'll share my screen here in a second. So as a starting point, the PLLC decision is really one that you should educate yourself about it. You should look into it, and if you feel like it's for you, you should do it. The sooner the better, because there's some benefits of in any given tax year. There's some limitations on when you can apply to become an S corp and not become an S corp, be taxed as an S corp, and this tax savings for that. If that benefit makes sense, then you might want to do that, but you may not realize that this year is going to be a year where it would make sense, because there are some levels that you need to get to before that makes sense. And so if you get to that point later in the year and you haven't established a PLLC yet, you have to then establish the PLLC at that point, and you can't go back retroactively in that particular year and become an S corp. Where you can do that, if you had set up the PLLC early in the year, and then later on in the year, 6-7 months later, you hit a couple home runs and you're starting to make some money where the numbers make sense, and it just gives you that ability to go backwards in time a little bit, which is a rarity for a lot of things along those lines. So I'm going to share my screen because I think the numbers help the understanding a little bit. So I'm assuming everything's good. Yep, got the Renee's my trigger person, boy. She got that thumb ready. I love it. So now we're just gonna use an example of somebody who is making a profit in their business activities of $120,000. Currently, as a real estate agent, you may be doing business in your personal name. You get a 1099 typically at the end of the year, which is a tax document that says here's how much money you made. The brokerage sends it to you. It's very easy to track your income because they track it for you. And so in this case, we'll say it's $150,000 1099, and you had $30,000 of just basic expenses like supplies and signage and dues and things that to do your business, travel in your car, stuff like that. So now you're down to $120,000 profit as a 1099 person with it in your name and your social security, or as a PLLC. In either event, all the information shows up on a Schedule C on your personal tax return, and you would report the Schedule C would show your gross expenses of 150. It would show your income of 150, your expenses of 30, and you net down to 120, and then you would pay self-employment tax on that. So when you work for someone, I love watching my kids look at their pay stubs and talk about how much, I made a lot more than I took home, Dad. And I said, I get it. Welcome to adulthood. And so you get a W-2, you get income. Your company pays you based on how much they decided they're going to pay you, and then they take taxes out. They take taxes out for the federal government and the state government that you live in, and then they take taxes out for Social Security and Medicare. And Social Security and Medicare are two taxes that you pay half, and the employer has to match it. So as an employee, they take 6.2% out of your pay. They take 1.45% out of your pay, and then they turn around and send in another 6.2 and 1.45. That all adds up to 15.3%, half from you, half from the employer. And so as a self-employed person where you're not getting a W-2 and someone's not taking taxes out and sending them in, you're required to do that on your personal tax return. And you have to pay both sides of that. You are now the employer and the employee when you work for yourself. So there's this extra tax that shows up on your income that makes it look like it's a lot higher of a tax than if you just were an employee, and it is in fact that is the truth. So in this particular case, there's about $17,000 of those extra taxes that you have to pay and then really only half of that is extra because as an employee you're still paying half, but now you're paying both sides. So you have $17,000 there. There's some tax benefits that some of the recent tax bills put into place. I use those because I can't not show the bottom line number. It's just in my DNA. And then you get to deduct half of all the Social Security tax you pay. You get to take a deduction for 50% of it. And so that nets down to about $10,000 of extra taxes that you have to pay on your income tax return based on making $120,000 and showing it on a Schedule C. You have the ability to send in a form to the IRS, Form 2553, and it's an election to be an S corp. So you have the ability to send that in and say, I would like to be taxed as a small business corporation. There's some rules around that, but pretty much everybody qualifies unless you can't have more than 100 shareholders and things like that. So it's really built for the small person. People are using it all the time, and you'll learn more about the legal side of it and what the requirements are for the real estate division of what type of entity you can be. So you elect to be an S corp, and now what happens is you're reporting the same exact income. In this example, nothing changed other than now I'm going to report it as an S corp instead of on my personal return as a PLLC or just a sole proprietor if I didn't even establish a PLLC. So 120,000 is the income. Now what happens is you have to pay yourself wages. And you're an employee now of your corporation for tax purposes. So you have to pay, the IRS says, a reasonable compensation. There isn't a number. It's what's reasonable in the industry. There's a lot of rules that come into play. But reasonable, what we start people at generally is anywhere from 40 to 70 grand. It just really depends on how much money they made. The IRS does have there's some stipulations about, a 70-30 split or an 80-20 split or something along those lines. So the same 120,000, you now set up payroll and you take out wages. You pay yourself wages and you take taxes out on a regular basis and you send those to the government, just like you were working for the other company, and say you own the company and you had employees working for you, the same thing. You're just an employee now. The $40,000 is a deduction inside the company. So now you have 80,000 of profit. The 80,000 comes out on what's called a K1. A K1 is the same thing as a W-2. It's a corporate document that basically says you have a corporation and here's the profit that you earned in the corporation, and we're going to push that over onto your personal tax return. So you're reporting everything on the personal return just like you did here. This is on Schedule C. I got a K1 and I have a W-2. I get two separate tax documents from my corporation. The only amount of money in this 120 that you pay self-employment tax, this 15.3% tax on, is the wages. So the design here is you're allowed to treat some of it as a profit distribution from your company, and this 80,000 avoids the self-employment tax. And so we'll just go right to the bottom line because that's what we all like. And so the savings is about $7,500. And it really as simply is I got to pay self-employment tax on 120 or I pay self-employment tax on 40, and it's the same money. It's the same money in my pocket. It's just how I do it. So that's the tax advantage of getting to the point where potentially the PLLC could be treated as an S corporation for income tax purposes, and that's why you would consider it. You'll hear that. It's very common. It's very well known amongst tax preparers as to what that is. Once you do it, you need to kind of stick with it. You can revoke an S election and say, but you can't do it. Once you do it and you revoke it, you can't do it again for 5 years. Now, you always could start a different entity and all that stuff, but let's just put it this way. I would say when your profit after all your expenses is now starting to exceed 70, 60, 70, $80,000 a year, and you feel like that is sustainable, that's probably where I'm going to be at worst case, then I think that's when the S corporation starts to make sense. Because the tax savings, in that example of you make 70,000 profit and you take out 40 in wages. So there is a savings on the $30,000 in that example, but it's not maybe high enough to cover the cost. The cost for you to be an S corporation, probably in addition to your normal uh, regular individual tax cost, is about 2 grand a year, 1250 for a tax return, give or take, for the S corporation, and then about $700 for the cost of having payroll. Payroll is something that has to be reported every quarter. There's 2 or 3 reports that have to be submitted. And so the payroll companies charge about $60 a month for a sole proprietor, individual type person, from that standpoint. So in this particular example, I saved $7,500 in income taxes. It cost me about 2 grand to do so. My net savings is about $5,500. As the income level goes up, the savings goes up. You're making 150, 200, $250,000 now. There's a savings, the savings element goes up, and there is a maximum that you can take out for Social Security. Once you hit that, you can see here that's 160,000. So this is a great tool, and people use it all the time. That pretty much covers my portion of this. A lot of times I will go through and talk a little bit about the things that are deductible. So the things that are deductible generally for small business owners that they ask about all the time is, can I use my home? And the answer is yes, you can, but it has to be your main office. So if you have an office to go to, or your brokerage sets you up and there's an office and you go there on a regular basis, and sometimes you work from home, then you really can't take that as a home office, because it's not your primary office. That you're doing you're doing the core business is done at home in your office. The IRS looks at a few elements there. Where do you earn your money? You're just the paperwork stuff gets done at the house, but you're really out and about where you earn your money. Do you have another office? It has to be your primary one. And in the office in your home, it has to be an actual office. So it can be a spare bedroom, but it has to be, the spare bedroom really isn't supposed to have a bed in it. It's supposed to be really set up like an office. And a lot of people do that. I mean, it's very common. The computer desk in your master bedroom, it doesn't necessarily qualify. But and then what happens is you go through and you measure that space that you're using. And sometimes people will have a spare office, and then they'll have some storage place in their garage. So it might be a 10 by 10 storage in the garage where they store things, signs, things like that. And then they have an office. Typical office in a house is going to be 15 to 20 square feet on, maybe 200 to 300 square feet. You provide the total square footage of your house. I have a 3,000 square foot house. I'd use 300 square feet of it for the office. You get to take 10% of your expenses of your home. So your utilities, your homeowner's insurance, and mortgage interest, things like that can help offset some of your income. And then the other big one, quite honestly, is your vehicle and your mileage. And so it's really important to track your mileage. You have to have a mileage log. The mileage log is supposed to show the date you traveled, the number of miles, who you saw, and what the business purpose was. I suggest in the technology world, you get something. Mileage IQ is one that's either low cost or still no cost. So it's Mileage IQ. A lot of people that I know use that. It's GPS based. You in essence click a button when you get in your car and tell it that this is a business trip, and it tracks where you're going, and then you turn it off when you're done. And then you have the ability to type in some notes. I went to see Don. It was he's my tax guy, and blah blah blah. And it tracks the mileage for you. At the end of the year, it gives a really nice report that says, here's the total miles you drove on your car, and here's how many of those were business. The IRS requires that, and you can take your actual expenses, or you can take a standard deduction of about 70 cents a mile. So in a case where you drive a lot of miles, that's usually what we have people go with is the standard deduction. And then you just have to prove the mileage. You don't have to prove the actual expenses. If you're going to take actual expenses because you don't drive as many miles, but you use your car 80% of the time for business, then you have to track and provide, here's the gas I put in it, here's the oil changes, here's the repairs, the insurance, maybe interest if I have a loan, things like that. So you add those up, and now at 80% of the time it's business, you get to take 80% of those expenses. You get to take the higher of the two, and for each vehicle, you just have to pick which one you're going to do, and then you have to consistently do that for the life of that vehicle. You can't every year change your mind. Nowadays, for the most part, generally speaking, I would say standard mileage is the way people are filing their tax returns, unless they have a car that weighs more than 6,000 pounds. There's some benefits there if you buy one of those vehicles. Used to be the Hummer was the first one out, I think, years ago, was very common. I pay $80,000 for the car and I use it 80% of the time for business. I get to take a $64,000 tax deduction in the first year. And that still exists. So if you're driving vehicles that are more than 6,000 pounds, and how do you know? You open your car door and there's a little tag in there and it says your gross vehicle weight rating. I think it's GVWR, and it tells you how heavy your car is. And you say, oh, it's 4,600 pounds. Well, then that's just a normal car, and the depreciation rules don't allow you to take that large deduction as if it was over 6,000 pounds. So that's usually a distinctive number that they really market a lot in November. Buy your car before the year's over, you get a huge tax break. They're correct, but you got to remember this. You have to be driving your vehicle more than 50% of the time for business, and you have to be able to prove that. To take a deduction like that on your tax return is not risky business, but you better have good backup. That's the bottom line. Everything with the IRS is about documentation and backup. If you have good backup, then be aggressive. If you don't, and you don't have a mileage log, you're better off going with a more conservative view, because the penalties and interest and the stress of an audit is not something that anybody really wants to deal with for the most part. I have said enough. I've said it too fast. I apologize. If there's any questions, I will certainly try to answer those. Let me stop sharing here. Looks like there's just a good morning out there, other than some questions. And with that, I usually run now and go back to work. So
Thank you
for
so
your
much,
time.
Don.
You got it.
Yeah, we're going to hand it over now to our wonderful attorney, John Browder.
I missed it. I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I can't see myself, so I hope that you can see me.
Yep.
I don't know what I've done on my laptop, but I already have an S corp established because I started real estate in Washington, and in Arizona, they won't issue my checks in my S corp name, only my personal name, but my bank account is set up in my S corp name. So I'm constantly commingling funds because I constantly have to deposit checks into my personal bank account and then wait to transfer with a daily limit
Yeah.
days in advance. Is there any way to fix that? Because I don't want to. I was told by my CPA I can't take down my S corp without then having to wait to reestablish, and I really don't want to do that anyways because I've had it for almost 9 years now.
I'll probably defer a little bit to John, because I'm not sure why the real estate division, I'm not sure that why they won't issue the check to the S corp. I don't have an answer for that. That's
Okay.
I'm not exactly certain on that. But if you can get that registered in Arizona in a way that maybe John, you might have some ideas. I'm just not certain what's going on there.
Yeah, I'm not either. From what I've heard, I'm not certain that I quite understand the issue or what the hang up might be. And I'm not sure if it's an ADRE issue or a tax issue at this point.
Sorry, Lauren.
Sorry about that.
I wish there was an easy answer, but I don't think there is.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that one.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Anyways, sorry about that, Lauren. Maybe you can, hopefully we can get you some more information or get you pointed in the right direction on that, getting answers to that question. But before then, I'd like to, introduce myself. My name's John Browder. I'm an attorney here in Phoenix, in the Phoenix metro area. I do a lot of work with real estate agents and brokerages. Not only, do I help defend them if they're sued, but I also will, help advise them about risk management issues and things of that nature, and also give advice about just general, business and real estate transactions. And that's kind of what informs, how I approach this class. This class is a little different than it's been in the past, for me at least, because the ACC has changed the procedure for setting up any entity, including a professional limited liability company. And it's so I'm going to focus a little less on the technical aspects of setting the company up, although I will address the key issues as I see them doing that, and kind of focus a little more on some of the larger, bigger issues with regard to liability protection and what you guys, what it can and can't do for you, and what are the risks that you face as real estate professionals, and how to protect against that, and how a PLC helps you do that. So let's get started. The first thing that I'd like to emphasize is, what is a PLLC? Well, start with, let's just describe it. It's professional limited liability company. I'm sure most of you are familiar with an LLC, which is a limited liability company, and a PLLC is a version of that is for a licensed professional. You, as a real estate salesperson or broker, you're licensed by the Arizona Department of Real Estate, and state law says that you can operate your professional services through a PLLC. And if you do that, you're going to get some of the advantages of a limited liability company. And that's, what are those? Well, let's start by defining what they are not. You will not get liability protection for errors or omissions or acts that you do in the performance of providing retail real estate services. You're not going to get protection for that with a PLLC. That's because we, as professionals, I also am a licensed professional, we cannot absolve ourselves of liability for giving professional services. It's just the policy in the state of Arizona, and in every jurisdiction that I'm aware of, doesn't let people insulate themselves from wrongdoing like that. That said, the PLLC does offer a lot of liability protections for those types of risks and liabilities that you may come across when operating a business. For example, if you have a physical entity that you lease space from, and you have a client there who slips and falls and injures himself, then that person may sue your PLLC, and in that instance, you would have some, if you've set it up correctly, and if you've administered it correctly and not commingled your personal assets into it, you are going to have protection from your personal assets will be protected from a judgment that client, probably former client plaintiff, now has against your entity. So that's one way that it could help you. Another way that that would help you is, driving. For example, if you're driving in the performance of your duties, you might get into a car accident. It could help you protect your personal assets in that instance. On the other hand, there could be some complications if you're have a client in there, or if you're headed to a meeting or an open house or something like that. Nothing is ever as clear in the law as you want it to be, or as you see on television. So what we try to do is get you the PLLC, tell you what it can and can't do, and then hopefully get you set up or pointed in the right direction for the other things that can protect you, which is in this instance would be your E&O insurance and just generally good management of your real estate practices. So another thing I'd like to mention here that I see a lot of, that I'd like to warn people about, is a lot of real estate salespersons, they wind up getting involved with their own personal real estate investments. And then they wind up listing that property for sale, and and then sometimes the deal does not go right, and now that there's a lawsuit, there's claims made, and you're sued in maybe multiple respects. You might be sued as a seller. You might be sued personally as a representative of the seller. You'll be sued as a real estate agent, possibly. And all three of those things, all three of those capacities are different, and a PLLC will perhaps protect you for some of that, but not all of it. And my I think my key point about this general issue that I see with people, selling their own properties as owner agents, is all I can say is for you is I would recommend that you get a PLLC if you're going to be whether you're not doing that or not, but especially if you're doing it. I recommend also that you get an LLC to operate your personal real estate investments through. And I would suggest that if you have multiple entities, that you get one for each entity, even though it's more expensive. It's just cleaner, and you're not going to have people trying to get collect a judgment that for a slip and fall or an issue with one property and try to collect it from a different property. That has nothing to do with it. So the point about this is you can get into a lot of really thorny issues when you were doing real estate deals, and the LLC and the PLLC will offer you some protections, but it's only as good as you are in handling the administration of it and keeping everything separate. So with respect to your personal investments, nothing should be routed through your PLLC. And with respect to your PLLC, nothing about your real estate retail practice to clients should ever be mixed up or implicated with your LLC or your personal business, if that makes sense. And if you do mix it up, what happens or can happen is the law will disregard the liability protections provided by the legal entity. So if you mix up a bunch of stuff in your PLLC, the law may just say, the court will just say, look, we're just going to disregard it. It's like it didn't even exist. And that's not good. Okay. So there's a lot of complicated issues with liability protection. But again, your PLLC is one brick in a wall, so to speak, bad metaphor, but it's just one brick, but it's an important one. So how do we set it up? Well, you can set up a PLLC. It's a very simple thing to do. And that's why, I recommend that people do it. As Don said, do it earlier in the year. I would say, yeah, that's great advice. Do it as early as you can in your career. Whether you elect to do an S corp, as discussed by Don, is a whole different kind of, calculus and analysis that you're going to have to undergo. But as far as getting the protection of a PLLC and setting it up, that's something that's pretty simple. And you're going to do it at the Arizona Corporation Commission. You're going to need to set up what is now called an ABC ABC account. It used to be called an E Corp account. If you land at the page, you're going to want to choose the Corporations and Business Services, the ACC. It does this. It is where we go to get state entities recognized and created, but here it also regulates utilities and state securities laws issues. So the actual website it's got a lot of stuff on it, but you're going to be focusing on the business formations. When you get there and you've set up your ABC account, which is pretty simple process, I'm not going to go through it. You're going to want to set up your business. And the way you do it, your company, is you're going to choose the drop down for a domestic limited liability company. Now, again, you're not going to be choosing a domestic limited liability company. You're going to be choosing one of the options below it when you drop down, and that's going to be a professional domestic or a domestic professional limited liability company. If in the future you want to set up your own LLC for some reason for your real estate investments, this process will inform you how to do that. It's just that you're going to be choosing that other entity, the LLC, and not the professional limited liability company. Once you've done that, I'd like to kind of walk through a couple of the restrictions with a PLLC. The first main restriction is you can't use a fictitious name or a trade name. You are limited by law to use your name, full name, or your last name. So my name is John Browder. I would choose, John Browder PLLC if I were setting up my own law firm here, or maybe Browder PLLC. But I couldn't, I probably couldn't put, I know I couldn't put, Super Lawyer PLLC or any other, whatever. Choose whatever fictitious name. You need to have your name as the name of your company. And that's because you are a professional and you're providing professional services. It's a personal service that you're giving. And so the policy again is the law doesn't want to confuse people out in the world about who they're going to get this professional service. So that's why you have to use your name. The other thing that you'll see is I was going to say, if your name is already picked for some reason, I've never had that problem. But it's theoretically possible that there's another professional with your name in Arizona. All I can say about that is I've never seen it happen, and if it does happen, call a lawyer. I'm not sure how to resolve that yet because I haven't dealt with it. So you're going to walk down the next major kind of non-routine thing, that you're going to have to input is, what is this for? What professional services is your company for? Well, it's for retail real estate services, and the ADRE has some pretty specific requirements about what it wants to see you input into the ACC website in terms of what the purpose of this company is going to be. And here, what you're going to want to put is the magic words. And if you don't put these magic words, you're likely to have a problem with the ADRE later when you submit this. Not an insurmountable problem, but one that you can avoid just by simply using the magic words, which is the sole purpose of the professional limited liability company is to render professional real estate services. When you're asked what the purpose is, you need to use that language. And if you forget it, you haven't written it down, there's a form that you're going to be submitting with to the ADRE, and it's got that on it. And if not, the ADRE, it's pretty easy to get that information. So that's what you need to do. You need to very precisely state what the purpose is. Moving on, the duration of your company, it'll be pre-filled to be perpetual. There's no reason to change that. The next thing that I'd like to talk about there that is new, if you've already worked with the ACC, you're going to see that there's a new requirement since they've made the changes that went effect, I think, in mid-January of this year. And that's where you have to identify the, quote, character of business for your company. And there's a drop-down menu, like there always is with these things. And it's going to have you're going to have the opportunity to type in some information to try to get, pinpoint what it is that the character of the business is. I've went through this myself. And what you can do is if you type in real estate, you're going to get a drop-down menu that's going to list, quote, among other things, offices of real estate agents and brokers. And I bet you can guess that's what you're going to want to pick. The other ones are not applicable. So you're going to pick that, and there's going to be some sort of code number next to it. I didn't bother to write that down, but that's what you pick. You're going to be basically signaling to the ACC that you're setting up some sort of business related to a real estate salesperson or brokerage activities. In your case, it'll be a PLLC. It's not, by contrast, an employing brokerage or something like that.
John, can you say that again so that I can type it up in the chat? You're saying, so previously it was character of business and you would choose other and render professional real estate services. But now you're saying that it's different now because it's a different drop menu.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not clear. I'm glad you asked the question because obviously I'm not communicating properly or something like that. There are two drop-down menus that are important. The first one is like what we've always dealt with, where we have to type in the nature of the professional services. You use the magic words that the ADRE, and as you walk through the PLLC template on the ACC, that's the first one you're going to encounter. That has always been the same. And it still is, as far as I know, it's the same. I've not seen any sort of change by the ADRE in that regard. But what's different is the ACC itself, irrespective of the ADRE, has now asked all PLLCs, and I assume LLCs, I just haven't set one up recently enough to know, has to identify the character of the business. And there, it's pre-filled. Offices of real estate agents and brokers. Once you type in real estate, it'll give you some options. That's the on-point one. You're going to want to pick that one too. So it'll pre-fill that. You don't want to pick, I think there's appraisers, right? If there's be some other ones that pop up, you won't want to do that one. Does that make sense? Does that clarify it?
Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I got the right phrase for the chat so everybody can see it for later.
Perfect. Okay. So once once you've identified the character of the business, you're going to move on to the principal address. That's another principal is, you can think of it as the owner. You're the principal, you're the owner of this company. And you're going to need to put in some information about how it's going to be managed and who the principals are. And the first thing that you're going to come across is how do you want it managed? And you've got two choices with a company like this. It's manager managed or member managed. I am always recommending people, because they're either going to be sole member PLLCs, or maybe they're going to have one other member when they start, maybe their spouse or something like that. I always choose member managed, or recommend people to choose member managed, because they can do everything that you can with a manager managed choice. With a member managed one, you could, for example, hire a manager, and then you could fire a manager, and you could delegate to that manager all sorts of things to do. So I would choose member managed. That's my recommendation. And the next thing you're going to have to do is you're going to actually have to add in who owns this company. Who are the members? Well, you are the member. You, as a licensed professional, are a member, and beyond that, only licensed professionals, and in this case, real estate professionals, can be members of this company. For the most part, it's going to be a spouse. I see a lot of like husband, wife, or something like that, where there's a spousal relationship, and they're both normally with the same brokerage. You could talk to a lawyer about this or consult, but I think if you're married, you may be able to be at different brokerages. So if that applies to you, what I would suggest is you consult counsel to look into that if that's something that's important. But the main point for our purposes is only licensed real estate agents or brokers can be members of a PLLC. That's just driven by the state law. Okay, so you're going to put in your information, and one of the things you're going to be asked for is the address for the company, and this is important. That principal address for the company, business address, the business address is going to be public record. Okay, and I think most people don't want to have their personal residence as public record if they can avoid it. So what I normally say is hopefully your real estate brokerage you have an office that you can mark down as, this is where my real estate physical activities, where my real estate activities occurs, whether you're there 40 hours a week or not. Most probably aren't. That's going to be what I would recommend your business address to be, so that you can avoid putting your personal residence down as that. So that's relevant to the next thing that you're going to come across in walking through the process of setting up your PLLC, and that's the idea that your company needs to designate a statutory agent, which is an agent authorized by law to accept service of process for your company. Service of process is if it's sued, or if it's been subpoenaed, or sometimes there's various state agencies that will use a statutory agent to send just communications about certain things, like if you're if there's going to be some sort of renewal for your company, if or some sort of just various things. That's the statutory agent can receive it. You can hire a third party company to be a statutory agent, and I would advise you to do that if you cannot list a physical address that isn't your personal residence as the address for the statutory agent. So let me back that up a little bit. That's not clear. You can you can hire a commercial company to be your stat agent, or you could say, I will be the stat agent. I would say, yeah, be the stat agent if you can put your business address down as the physical address where the stat agent is going to be. And it has to be a physical address. It can't be a virtual address. It needs to be a place where a human being can go and hand you the lawsuit. So if you
It can't be a PO box or anything.
Not unless that. Well, I will say no for our purposes.
Okay.
No. I see people do it. In fact, this is like a war story. It's an LLC. I'm engaged in in lawsuits, and I subpoena people or subpoena companies. And I'll tell you, as a matter of fact, a lot of companies will not update their statutory agent, and they will put a PO box. And guess what? They get away with it. I mean, I don't recommend it because eventually you're going to get someone like me. It's going to be important enough that I chase you down and hunt you down and get you in trouble for doing it. So, set it up properly. It's got to be a physical address under the law. Do not have your personal residence be the physical address. So if you have no other options, hire a company to do it. It's not expensive. It's $120 a year, something like that. So with that said about the statutory agent, there's some other terminology when you're setting up a company like this with the ACC that you may be unfamiliar with. It's going to ask you to add, what's going to say, add an organizer. What is an organizer? Well, an organizer is you. That's who's organizing the company if you're putting it in. If I do it for a client, my client's not the organizer. I'm the organizer. I'm the one who's sitting behind the keyboard and I'm typing this in. So if you're the one setting up your company, you're going to just put in, your information as the organizer and add that. The ACC wants to see whoever it is setting up this company. On the other hand, if you have an assistant that's helping you and actually doing it, in the spirit of transparency and honesty, that person is the organizer. And they would have to put in their information or should put in their information, identifying themselves as the organizer. As a practical matter, it's just a formality, and I only really mention it because it's a term of art that, a lot of us, if you aren't doing this stuff, it may be the first time you've ever kind of come across that word. What does that really mean? It's pretty non-consequential so long as you, just type in the right information. So once you've done that, you're going to get a chance to review all the stuff, the stat agent, who the principals are, the principal address, the member's address. Again, that one's not going to be, that's going to be you, but it's not going to be that one won't be public record. On the other hand, if you can go ahead and put another address, I would do it, then I try to insulate my residents from everything, but I do it only to the extent that it's lawful. I mean, I don't want to, flout the law because eventually, somebody will call you to the carpet on it and you might get into some trouble. So once you've kind of walked through that, you've verified everything, you're just going to go ahead and pay for this thing. And the default now is expedited, I think. If it's not the default on as you set it up, I would choose expedited service, pay the extra $30 or $35, whatever it is, on top of the maybe $100. They may have increased the price. I wasn't sure about that. I think it is now $100. So you're looking at $100, $135, or maybe just $100 to get this thing all set up. And that's it. And then, if you get an email, you might get an email if you've chosen yourself as a statutory agent saying, hey, I accept this designation as statutory agent. Your company's not going to be set up formally until you say yes. Okay, so you need to go ahead and respond to that email, confirm that you're going to be the statutory agent. If you've chosen a commercial service to be your statutory agent, it's going to be a few days before they can, they're going to have some separate paperwork that they'll be sent and they need to submit. And they're very good at it. They know what they're doing. They do it quickly, but just warn you, you're not actually going to have it set up as quickly as you would if you did it yourself. Okay. Or you served as your own statutory agent. So once you've got that, you're going to get an email that says, your company has been accepted for filing. Go ahead and just start organizing your company on your computer and download your documents, because you're going to wind up needing that piece of paper when you go and get your EIN number at the IRS. You're going to want that because you need an employer identification number. You don't need it, but you can use your social security number. But I think most people wind up getting an EIN number from the IRS. It doesn't cost anything. And it's easy to do. You can do it immediately by going to the IRS. Do not get suckered into the third-party services that charge you money to do it. They'll take your money and there's no need to do that. The time it takes me to say this sentence, we probably could have got an EIN number handled. So you get your EIN number for your company, then you have your articles of organization. That's the document that the ACC will send you. You have your EIN. Now you're in a position to get a bank account for your company. That's going to be where eventually your commission checks will be deposited, and you'll also be using that bank account for basically operating your operating account for your company. So the bank, though, is going to require you to have, most likely will require you to have the EIN if you're not using your social security number, and it definitely is going to want you to see those articles of organization. Okay. Once you've set up your bank account, your company, and you've got your EIN, then there's the paperwork you need to submit with to the ADRE. Again, it's all pretty routine information: your license number, your address, your brokerage. You used to have to get your designated broker signature, but you do not need to do that anymore. And then you want to scan all your articles of organization onto that and then upload it to your message center. Now, I can't really help you do that because that's specific to you. But that's the process. And if you've done everything correct, it'll be a day or two and the ADRE will let you know. I've messed this up before where I've done it for a client where I didn't use the magic words and I've had to fix it. If that happens to you, not a big deal. You can fix it. You'll have to, make some amendments, with the ACC. You'll use that ABC account. If this becomes problematic for you or something that you don't want to do, there are a lot of attorneys that can, assist you in doing that. I have clients that have me do it. They're perfectly capable of doing it, but they have a lot of work that they're doing, sometimes all across the country. And so, articles of amendments are again, it's an easy thing to do. I think you can do it, but if you need help with it, there's help out there. Okay. You've done your ADRE. Renee, what else am I missing here? I think we're about ready to go to the back office brokerage.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Good.
I mean, you did the Arizona Corporation Commission. You talked about getting an EIN. You referenced getting a bank account information, and you just need to register with the ADRE, and then the rest of it is that last mile with your brokerage.
Okay. Yeah, and that is you'll contact in our brokerage. I think it's you, Renee, right? You're the person that our agents would go to, and if you're at a different brokerage, I'm not exactly sure. But Renee, if you could tell, maybe what happens when they bring their paperwork into you and kind of show it to you. What mechanically is happening? What do they need to do to kind of get this over the finish line?
Sure. Thank you, John. Essentially, if you want to get paid to that PLLC, it's got to be on your license. So a lot of you will go through all of those preliminary steps, but if you don't get it on your license, we can't pay you that way. And that's because of regulations through the actual Department of Real Estate. So as John described, a lot of this process and a lot of those important phrases, those are regulations by the Department of Real Estate as to how you can set up your business. So if your name isn't set up correctly or isn't set up as your name versus a fictitious name, or if you didn't put in the special phrase render professional real estate services or choose the right offices of real estate, those little hiccups will bite you at the time that you're going to register through the Department of Real Estate. So if you can set it up early and get it done correctly early on, then you won't have to go through and correct some of those issues. But again, like John was mentioning, it's just easy with an amendment. It may take a few extra days. With the Department of Real Estate, it's a really easy form to fill out. You're just going to put in your entity information. You can find the form on their website. It's just a PC or PLLC application. You fill it out with your PLLC information, the name as it matches your articles of organization when you submit them. And then you are essentially going to make sure that you copy the articles of organization themselves provided to you by the Arizona Corporation Commission, along with that copy of the application. You're going to scan them in as a PDF. You're going to log into your ADRE agent portal and click on the link that says add a PLLC to my license. You'll submit it to the message center with those two documents. Say, this is, my license. I'd like to add a PLLC. And depending on what their staffing is, you can hear back from them in an hour, or you might hear back from them in 2 days. It really depends on how busy they are. They'll issue something that states that you're good to go. They'll actually add that to your public page. So if I were to be, somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to be paid through my PLLC, my first thing to do is to look you up on the public page that everybody can see, and it will have your PLLC name listed there. However that is, that's how I pay you. Some of us do sometimes change our name. either through marriage or divorce or just for fun. If you're going to do that and you don't change your PLLC through the entire process and then through the Department of Real Estate, we would still pay you only as it was on your license. So there's only two ways to go about doing it: getting paid under your name or paid under your PLC name. That's the only way. Some people do ask the question when you're doing contracts, when you're working with clients and you're submitting paperwork, do you use your PLLC name or your name? You're going to just use your name as an agent. The PLLC is more for protections after the fact, like John was talking about for legal purposes and Don was talking about for tax purposes. That's why you're doing a PLLC, but you as an agent are the one acting on the transaction, so you use your name. So essentially, you've gone to your bank, you've created a bank account. Now you want to tell your brokerage that you want to get paid to that bank account. A lot of us these days get paid direct from title if we can. So you want to make sure that your banking and routing information is correct on the documentation, like usually your CBA that goes to the title company so that they know to pay directly to that account. And then also, if for any reason you have any funds that you want, say if you have monthly fees, quarterly fees, or however it is that you pay them annual, depending on your brokerage, you can actually have it extracted from that account as well. So add a debit or a credit card for payment purposes to your brokerage as well. And it makes tax time a little bit more easy because everything's documented under the same thing. That's pretty much the gist of it. The one thing that I want everybody to know is that it is March right now. If any of you have earned income prior to the point of registering your PLLC, it's still going to be paid under and reported to the IRS under your Social Security number. So anything that you've earned up to this point. The brokerage cannot issue a 1099 in your PLLC name until it's effectively with your license. So lots of you may have earned commissions at this point, and that's really good. Congratulations. But just know that if it's not under the PLLC at the time that it was registered with your license, it's still going to be under your Social Security number. But moving forward, everything will be under your PLLC and your EIN should you choose to register that separately. So if you're doing it right now, at the end of the year for next year's tax season for 2026, you would get two 1099s. And then every year moving forward, you just get one 1099 for your PLLC. You can also remove your PLLC or edit the name or any of that information. But again, you would just go through the process through the Corporation Commission first. Update it also with the IRS, make sure that's getting done. Your bank, make sure you go through the whole process again to let them all know that what your change is. And then you're going to register that change with the same form with the Department of Real Estate, and then your brokerage can change it for you. Okay. So the only things on that last step are, again, setting up your accounts and your accounting information. So for our particular, at my home group, I will help you with setting up the PLLC, but our accounting department would help you with the banking information. And you would need a new W-9 with that PLLC tax information in order for us to report it to the IRS properly for you at the end of the year. But that's it. We only had one question in the chat and you answered it earlier. Can it be set up as a name of your choosing, or does it have to be your name? Length, somebody asked what's the estimated length of time from start to finish to set it up. John, you've done this lots of times.
Yeah. If you're asking like what it takes, like, as you're sitting behind the computer to do it, I actually did a test run last night. It was probably, first time with the new system. It took me about 40 minutes. Might take you a little bit more, maybe a little less. But it's basically, that's it. I mean, it really, under the old system, when I was, I knew it better and I had been doing it more, I mean, I could probably do it in 10 minutes. It's just that, yesterday we kind of walking through some new things. But it's not an involved process. It doesn't take a long time. Normally the ACC is very quick to turn around and approve your articles. If that's what you mean, you're looking at maybe a day or two. If you've expedited service. If you have an expedited service, I don't know. I'm not going to guess how long it'll take because I never do it. I always expedite.
Well, that Todd said he just did it during the Zoom meeting. Good job, Todd.
Yep. It's pretty, yeah, you definitely could do it during the Zoom meeting. Yeah.
Good, awesome. Somebody says, I believe I need to make an amendment to my PLLC. Before doing so, can I connect with someone to ensure the changes I will make will suffice for the ADRE? Yes, and we can also follow up with the guidelines from the Department of Real Estate in an email that we have the contact information for Don, for John, for myself, and some extra tips and tricks that we are talking about on here that we can give to you for information. So yeah, absolutely. And you can contact John after this and see if that's something that he can assist you with to make sure you get everything done correctly.
Okay. It looks like there's one other question. Is there a checklist for setting it up? I've not put a checklist together yet in terms of each step with the ACC, because it's quite a few steps. They're simple steps, but it's like, address here. You have to put your address and your name in, and it counted, I think, 3 times. So, for more broadly, what is the checklist? It's set up the PLLC at the ACC, get your EIN, make your S Corp election if that's something that makes sense to do financially, get your bank account, file the paper with the ADRE, and then coordinate with your brokerage. So those are the big things you want to do. As far as the ACC actually setting it up, it kind of walks you through and tells you what to do. There are quite a few steps. I think I've highlighted the ones that are kind of new or might throw you for a loop as somebody who doesn't do this every day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. If you guys have additional questions, again, we do follow up with an email with contact information, a couple of clues and tips, and some of the documents that we showed you here earlier. So do reach out to us, but that's the end of today's meeting. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.